The moment 82-year-old Barbra Streisand walked onto the Voice stage, something extraordinary filled the air, not because of her appearance, though her careful steps and the way she held herself with practiced dignity were evident under the bright studio lights, but because of the weight of vocal history that followed her, the knowledge that one of the greatest voices in entertainment history was about to grace the stage where so many young artists had launched their dreams. What nobody in that studio was prepared for was witnessing the heartbreaking reality of aging's effect on a voice that had once been considered the gold standard of vocal excellence. The cruel way that time can diminish even the most extraordinary instruments, stealing the very ability that had defined a legendary career spanning more than 6 decades. Hidden in this moment was not just the story of one woman's struggle with the inevitable effects of aging on her voice, but a meditation on perfection, on the way great artists face the loss of abilities they had once taken for granted, on the profound vulnerability that comes when your greatest strength becomes your greatest fear. Let me take you back to understand how this moment came to be, because Barbra's appearance on The Voice represents not just a tribute to one of music's greatest vocalists, but a reminder of how the pursuit of perfection can become both a blessing and a curse when the instrument that made that perfection possible begins to fail. Barbra Streisand had been widely regarded as one of the finest vocalists of her generation, possessing a voice that combined technical precision with emotional depth in ways that had influenced countless other singers. From her early days performing in nightclubs in Brooklyn to her legendary career on Broadway, in films and in recording studios, Barbra had set standards for vocal excellence that few artists could even approach, much less match. Her voice had been her identity, her gift, and her burden. Known for her perfectionism in the recording studio, for her ability to hit impossibly high notes with crystal clarity, for her distinctive vibrato and phrasing that had become instantly recognizable to audiences around the world, Barbra had built a career on the foundation of vocal supremacy that had made her one of the best-selling recording artists of all time. Songs like The Way We Were, Evergreen, Don't Rain on My Parade, and People hadn't just showcased her technical abilities, they had demonstrated her unique capacity to convey complex emotions through vocal interpretation, to tell stories through melody and phrasing, in ways that connected with audiences on the deepest levels. But at 82, Barbra had been quietly struggling with the natural aging process that affects all vocalists, the gradual changes in breath support, vocal cord flexibility, and range that come with advancing years. For someone whose career had been built on vocal perfection, these changes had been particularly difficult to accept, leading her to largely retire from live performance rather than risk disappointing audiences who expected to hear the voice they remembered from her prime. The invitation to appear on The Voice had come through a mutual friend who understood that Barbra had been struggling with the decision to step away from singing entirely. Blake Shelton, who had long admired Barbra's artistry and had often cited her as an influence on his understanding of vocal interpretation, had personally reached out to invite her to share one of her signature songs with a new generation of viewers who might not fully appreciate her contributions to popular music. Barbra's team had been hesitant about the appearance, knowing that she had become increasingly anxious about performing live, especially in settings where her voice would be heard without the studio enhancements and multiple takes that had allowed her to maintain her perfectionist standards in recent years. But Barbra herself had felt drawn to the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to connect with younger audiences and perhaps to prove to herself that she could still share her gift with the world. "I need to know if I still have something to offer," Barbra had told her longtime manager during their discussions about the appearance. "I've spent my whole life being known for my voice, and I'm terrified that if I can't sing the way I used to, I won't know who I am anymore." Standing on The Voice stage now, Barbra felt both the excitement and the terror that had become constant companions whenever she considered performing. The bright lights seemed harsher than she remembered from her earlier television appearances, the audience larger and more intimidating than the intimate concert halls where she had performed in recent years. Blake Shelton, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan sat in their red chairs, all turned to face her with expressions of profound respect and anticipation. Each of them understood that they were in the presence of vocal royalty, someone whose technical achievements and artistic legacy had influenced their own musical development in countless ways. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake announced with barely contained excitement, "we have the incredible honor of welcoming one of the greatest voices in the history of popular music. Her songs have been the soundtrack to romance, heartbreak, and triumph for generations of listeners. Tonight we get to hear one of those timeless classics performed by the woman who made it immortal. Please welcome the legendary Barbra Streisand." The studio erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever, with audience members rising to their feet in recognition of Barbra's contributions to entertainment. The ovation was overwhelming, filled with genuine love and appreciation from people who understood they were witnessing something rare and special. Barbra stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her position. She had chosen to perform "The Way We Were," the song that had become one of her signature pieces and had earned her an Academy Award, a song that required both technical precision and emotional vulnerability to be performed properly. "This is a song that has been very special to me for many years," Barbra began, her speaking voice still carrying the distinctive New York accent and careful diction that had always characterized her performances. "It's about memory, about love that changes us, about how the people we've shared our lives with become part of who we are, even when they're no longer with us." Barbra began to sing, starting with the lower notes that still felt comfortable and familiar. "Memories light the corners of my mind." For the opening phrases, Barbra's voice showed the experience and interpretive sophistication that had made her legendary. Even with the natural changes that age had brought, there was still something magical about the way she approached a song, the intelligence and emotional understanding she brought to every phrase. But as she moved toward the higher notes that the song demanded, something began to go wrong. The soaring passages that had once come effortlessly, the sustained high notes that had defined her reputation as a vocalist, suddenly seemed elusive and difficult. "Misty watercolored memories." Barbra's voice cracked noticeably on the word watercolored, the note breaking in a way that would have been unthinkable during her prime years. She paused, looking startled and embarrassed, her hand moving instinctively to her throat, as if she could somehow fix whatever had gone wrong. "Of the way we were," she attempted to continue, but the damage to her confidence had been done. The next high note cracked even more obviously, and Barbra stopped singing entirely, standing at the microphone with tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Barbra said quietly into the microphone, her voice thick with emotion and embarrassment. "My voice used to soar to those notes without effort. I could hit every high note perfectly, hold them as long as the song required, never worry about whether my voice would be there when I needed it." The studio had fallen completely silent, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something profoundly personal and painful. This wasn't just a technical difficulty. This was an artist confronting the loss of the very ability that had defined her identity and career. "Now it barely whispers where it used to sing," Barbra continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know how to be Barbra Streisand with a voice that can't do what people expect Barbra Streisand's voice to do." Barbra took a step back from the microphone, clearly preparing to leave the stage, her face showing the kind of embarrassment and defeat that comes from failing at something you had always excelled at. For someone who had built a career on local perfection, this public struggle with her limitations was devastating. Blake Shelton felt his heart break as he watched one of his musical heroes struggling with the cruel realities of aging. Without thinking, without consulting anyone, without following any protocol, Blake was out of his chair and moving toward the stage. His cowboy boots clicked against the polished floor as he approached this vocal legend who needed support, who needed someone to remind her that her worth as an artist went far beyond technical perfection. "Miss Streisand," Blake said softly as he reached her, his voice filled with respect and compassion. "Please don't leave. Please don't let this moment define what you mean to all of us." Barbra looked at Blake with eyes that were filled with tears and confusion. struggling to understand how she could continue when her voice had so obviously failed her in front of millions of viewers. "Blake, you don't understand," Barbra said, her voice trembling. "I've spent my entire career being known for vocal perfection. People expect me to hit every note flawlessly, to never show weakness, to always deliver the kind of technical excellence that justified my reputation. I can't do that anymore, and I don't know how to be anything less than perfect." Blake's own eyes filled with tears as he realized the profound pressure that Barbra had been carrying throughout her career. The impossible standards she had set for herself, the way that her greatest strength had become a prison that prevented her from accepting the natural changes that come with age. "Miss Streisand," Blake said, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "you are so much more than just technical perfection. You are the voice of our generation, the artist who taught us that singing isn't just about hitting notes, it's about touching hearts, telling stories, making people feel less alone in the world. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Blake turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying across the space with the authority of someone who had spent years understanding the true meaning of artistry. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake announced, "what we just witnessed wasn't a failure, it was courage. Miss Streisand just showed us what it means to be vulnerable, to be human, to continue creating even when your instrument isn't what it used to be. That's not weakness. That's the definition of a true artist." Blake looked directly at Barbra, whose tears were now flowing freely but whose posture was beginning to straighten as she heard his words. "Miss Streisand, I want you to finish this song. Not because you have to prove anything to anyone, but because this song means something to millions of people, and right now it means something to you. Sing it with the voice you have today, not the voice you had 20 years ago." "But I can't hit those high notes the way I used to," Barbra protested, her voice still shaking with uncertainty. "Then don't," Blake replied simply. "Sing it lower, sing it softer, sing it however your voice wants to sing it today. Beauty isn't about perfection, Miss Streisand. Beauty is about truth, about authenticity, about sharing your heart even when your voice isn't cooperating." Kelly Clarkson, who had been crying throughout this exchange, called out from her chair, "Barbra, some of my most powerful performances have been the ones where my voice cracked, where I wasn't technically perfect but I was emotionally honest. Please don't rob us of hearing your heart just because your voice has changed." John Legend added, "Miss Streisand, you've influenced every vocalist of the past 50 years. We didn't fall in love with your technical perfection, we fell in love with your humanity, your ability to make us feel what you were feeling through song." Neil, clearly moved, despite the generational gap, said simply, "I may be young, but I know greatness when I see it. And greatness isn't about never failing, it's about continuing to create even when creating becomes difficult." The audience, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented, began to applaud softly, not the excited applause of entertainment, but the supportive applause of encouragement, of love, of recognition that they were watching an artist confront her fears and choose courage over comfort. Barbra looked around the studio, taking in the faces of people who were offering her not judgment but support, not criticism but love. She wiped her tears and walked back to the microphone with a determination that came not from confidence in her abilities, but from understanding that her value as an artist transcended any single performance. "You're right," Barbra said to Blake. And to the audience, her voice steadier now, "this song isn't about me hitting perfect high notes. It's about memory, about love, about the way relationships change us and stay with us even when the people are gone. I can still sing about that, even if I can't sing it the way I used to." Barbra began the song again, but this time she approached it differently. Instead of trying to recreate the soaring, technically perfect version that had made her famous, she sang it as a conversation, as a reflection, as someone who had lived long enough to understand the true meaning of the lyrics she was sharing. Memories may be beautiful, and yet, what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. Her voice was softer now, more fragile, but also more intimate and emotionally direct. The high notes that had cracked earlier were approached differently, sung with a conversational tone that emphasized the meaning rather than the technical display. So it's the laughter we will remember, whenever we remember the way we were. When Barbra reached the final phrase, she didn't attempt the soaring high note that the original arrangement called for. Instead, she sang it simply, directly, like someone sharing a precious memory with a close friend. The effect was more moving than any technical virtuosity could have been. As the song ended, the silence in the studio was profound and respectful. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not the excited applause of entertainment, but the reverent applause of gratitude, of recognition, of love for someone who had just demonstrated what real courage looked like. Blake remained beside Barbra throughout the applause, making sure she understood that she had not failed, but had succeeded in a way that was perhaps more meaningful than any perfect performance could have been. "Miss Streisand," Blake said when the applause finally died down, "what you just did was more powerful than any technically perfect performance. You showed us that real artistry isn't about perfection, it's about honesty, about vulnerability, about continuing to share your gifts, even when those gifts change over time." Barbra looked at Blake with eyes that were clearer now, showing relief and understanding rather than embarrassment and fear. "I spent so many years being afraid of not being perfect," she said. "I forgot that the reason people connect with music isn't because it's perfect, it's because it's real." "Exactly," Blake replied with a smile. "And what you just shared with us was the most real, most honest, most beautiful version of that song I've ever heard. You sang it like someone who has lived every word of it, who understands what those memories mean because you've accumulated enough of them to know their value." Kelly Clarkson approached the stage, tears still streaming down her face. "Barbra, thank you for showing us that it's okay to be human, that our voices don't have to be perfect to be meaningful. You just gave every vocalist watching this the permission to be authentic rather than flawless." John Legend added, "That performance will stay with me forever, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was emotionally perfect. You reminded us why we fell in love with music in the first place." Niall, clearly moved, said, "I'll never think about that song the same way again. You showed me that great songs get better with age, that they mean more when they're sung by someone who has lived long enough to understand their depth." The segment became one of the most watched and most discussed moments in The Voice history, shared millions of times across social media with comments from viewers who had been moved by Barbra's vulnerability and Blake's compassionate response. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with thousands of people writing to share their own experiences with aging, with facing limitations, with learning to accept changes in abilities they had once taken for granted. Many wrote about how Barbra's performance had given them permission to continue pursuing their passions even when they couldn't perform at the level they once had. Vocal coaches and music teachers used the performance as an example of how artistry transcends technical ability, how emotional honesty can be more powerful than perfect technique. Music therapy programs incorporated the message that value as an artist doesn't diminish when abilities change. "That night taught me something profound about the nature of artistic integrity," Blake said in interviews afterward. "Barbra showed me that real artists don't stop creating when they can no longer create perfectly. They adapt, they find new ways to share their gifts, they choose authenticity over image." The appearance also sparked conversations about aging in the entertainment industry, about the pressure on performers to maintain impossible standards throughout their careers, about the beauty that can be found in vulnerability and imperfection. Barbra's team released a statement after the show aired, expressing gratitude for the love and support shown to her during what had initially felt like a moment of failure, but had become a moment of triumph. "Barbra's always been a perfectionist, which has been both her greatest strength and her greatest challenge," the statement read. "What happened on The Voice reminded her that her worth as an artist has never been just about technical perfection. It's been about her ability to connect with people, to make them feel understood and less alone. That ability doesn't diminish with age. If anything, it grows stronger." Blake learned something that night that changed his understanding of artistry forever. Barbra taught me that the goal of being an artist isn't to achieve perfection. It's to remain authentic, to keep sharing your truth, even when your voice changes, even when your abilities evolve, even when you have to find new ways to express what's in your heart. The performance became a turning point for Barbra as well. Rather than retiring from music entirely, she began to approach singing differently, focusing on intimate settings where she could share songs conversationally rather than trying to recreate the technically perfect performances of her youth. Because sometimes the most powerful performances are the ones that remind us we're all human. Sometimes the most moving moments come when perfection gives way to authenticity, when technical brilliance is replaced by emotional honesty, when artists choose vulnerability over invincibility. And sometimes an 82-year-old legend, struggling with a cracked voice, can teach us all that real beauty isn't about flawless execution. It's about the courage to keep creating, keep sharing, keep connecting with others, even when our instruments aren't what they used to be. Barbra Streisand's appearance proved that the voice isn't just about discovering perfect new talents, it's about celebrating all voices, honoring the journey that every artist takes, and understanding that the most precious performances are often the ones that show us what it means to age with grace, to face limitations with dignity, and to find new ways to share old truths when the old ways no longer serve us. The way we were may be different from the way we are, but the music continues, the connections remain, and the heart that drives real artistry beats just as strongly, even when it has to find new rhythms to express its unchanging truths.